Hi guys, welcome to Those Two Chicks with a Podcast. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Emma Grace. Today we are going to be doing something a little different from our normal true crime episodes and talk about an active missing persons case. You may have seen our recent trailer, and today we are talking about Richard Hitchcock.
Now, some of you may or may not know, but this case is close to home. It's actually our hometown. Emma Grace and I grew up seeing missing person signs of Richard all over Allegan, but never knowing what happened to him. And ever since Emma Grace suggested starting a podcast, I immediately told her I wanted to cover this case.
I think if you are familiar with this case, then you may also be familiar with the fact that there are multiple theories and rumors. The truth is, this case is unsolved, and we honestly do not know what happened to Richard. Our goal with covering this case is to give you the information we have learned from the family, public records, and law enforcement. Throughout this episode, you will hear the voices of Richard's brother Stephen, his cousin Kelly, and Officer Matt Like of the Allegan City Police Department, who has been assigned to Richard's case.
Before we start, we would like to mention that we will talk about what we know to be facts and what was reported, but all theories are alleged and we can't confirm them as true. This is a touchy subject as this is the town we are from, but we will be naming persons of interest. Again, everyone is innocent until proven guilty. Our goal is to present his case the best we can to bring awareness. We don't think this podcast episode will solve his case, but we do think that getting the conversation going again could help.
The smallest little detail that somebody's holding on to because they just figure this can't have anything to do with it. Those are the things we need people to report. Because a lot of times it's that little detail that, or something they thought, well, 20 other people probably told you this anyway, so I'm not going to be number 21. You know, thinking it's already out there when it might not be.
So let's begin. Richard Eugene Dale Hitchcock, who often went by the nickname Richie, was born in Allegan, Michigan on April 16, 1969. Richard lived with his parents out in the country with his older brother and his younger brother.
Grew up in a typical Allegan country setting, digging out frogs and hunting and fishing and doing that kind of stuff with their dad. He was a hard worker. He had a great sense of humor. I can still hear him laugh. That's one thing I can still hear, and he had the most obnoxious laugh, but now it doesn't seem so.
Richie was just your typical Allegan country boy who loved to be outdoors. When we spoke to Stephen, he mentioned Richie would stand up for him and how great of a big brother he was.
Growing up, it's just like typical brotherly love of, I hate you every day, but I still love you. And, just through the years, parents separating and brothers moving different places. I still lived with my mom, and Richie did also. And, it was kind of adventurous. We fished a lot and had a good time. He taught me quite a bit. And, as he had a driver's license, and we go out trail ride and just go see stuff. And, he would fight for you and take care of you as a brother should.
Richie's cousin Kelly has been a huge advocate for his case. She is deeply involved and has been fighting to keep his story alive. When we asked Kelly what Richie was like, she described him as a prankster and a jokester. The last time Kelly saw Richie was when he spotted her and they ended up smelt dipping together.
It was just before, it was the year he went missing. It was that year during smelt dipping season. And we were down there on the beach, and I hear, "Is that you, Kelly?" And I look up, and it's Richie. And so we ended up sitting there on the beach of Lake Michigan while we were smelt dipping and just had a beer together. We didn't know what was coming, that might be our last time we ever actually got to speak to each other.
On December 22nd, 1990, Richie headed to a bar that was called the Riverfront Lounge at the time. Richie was drinking, and it got to a point where he was asked to leave, so he did. Richie came back to the bar and was then escorted out by the bouncer. Now here's where the story gets muddy. The main theory at the beginning of the investigation was that somehow Richie ended up in the river behind the bar. Now, this would not be easy, especially for someone who was intoxicated. The riverbank was, and still is to this day, heavily wooded. He would have needed to do some serious scaling to get down to the water.
Let's talk about the few different ways eyewitnesses claimed he could have ended up in the Kalamazoo River. The bouncer of the bar, a man named Bob Clark, and another man named Richard Green claimed they saw Richie walk away from the bar to a fenced-in parking lot right next door. This parking lot did not have Richie's car, and the fence itself was 8 foot tall and had barbed wire on top. But for some reason, they said that Richie had climbed over the first fence into the parking lot and then over another to get to the riverbank. Police did not find any evidence nor clothing or DNA on the barbed wire, which is odd considering how difficult it would be to scale this fence intoxicated and not snag any fabric of your clothing or any skin.
Again, this just makes no sense. Richard would have had no reason to go over this fence, but nonetheless, that was their story. Richie's car was discovered a few days later about a block and a half away. There were Christmas presents in the back seat. Richie's keys had a scorpion keychain on them, and they were never found.
Well, at first, it's just like, well, Rich, he's out and about doing something, he'd like to go out and have a good time, blindsided us. And, we had Christmas presents and all that for each other, and he never come home to get them.
Here's where it gets even more strange. An eyewitness came forward years later claiming that he saw those two men, Bob Clark and Richard Green, beating Richie in the parking lot. This is incredibly odd considering Bob and Richard Green seemed to be the last ones to see Richie alive.
Now, why would they do this? Well, according to Kelly, it was drug-related. At the time, Richard Green was said to be the local marijuana dealer in the area, and there was a possibility that he needed to teach Richie a lesson. Was Richie potentially wound up in some trouble that the family didn't know about?
And what would be Bob's motivation? Well, at the time, he was known for being a pretty violent drunk and the town bully. Kelly even states she spoke to someone recently who had told her about Bob viciously beating them in the past.
We want to mention again, all people mentioned are innocent until proven guilty. These are all alleged and no one has been named a suspect, only a person of interest.
Now from here, the story breaks off into a lot of different theories about Richie being taken away from the bar and something happening to him in a different location. So let's stick with the river theory for just a moment before we get into other possibilities.
Like we stated before, to a lot of people who are either family, friends, or even those who just read about this case in general, the theory of Richie climbing the fence seems almost impossible.
Many searches have been completed in the area surrounding the riverbank. These searches have included divers, boats, planes, drones, underwater radar, and search dogs. They were very extensive. This body of water is also not one that could just carry a body away easily.
So law enforcement is very certain that Richie's body did not end up in that river. So if Richie's not there, then where is he?
Well, some believe Richie could be on a piece of property that either Richard Green or Bob Clark had access to. We are now going to talk about some of these searches.
One location that has been searched is 200 acres that used to belong to Richard Green's ex-wife. The property had new owners, and they were asked if a search of their property could be done. With their permission, and after fundraising to cover the expenses, a week-long search of the house and property was done.
We excavated her basement bathroom. And on that particular thing, the police were bystanders to some of it. It was not a one-day project. It was a week-long project. We called it an El Chapo tunnel. Because the bathroom floor had heating elements with like one-of-a-kind tile, it was pretty ugly to try, and it was costly. We literally cut out of the concrete of the foundation 3 foot by 5 foot square, and then we hand dug and hauled bucketful by bucketful outside the dirt to get over underneath that bathroom. And I have to say, because we had done the radar on it and everything, and the police thought we were going to find him there.
It was devastating for the family to not find anything. The homeowner truly believed Richie's body was there. Everyone did.
Both of us, we cried for 3 days. It was pretty devastating to not find him there because, like I said, even law enforcement believed he was there.
We also talked with Kelly about when she was able to tip up a stump on the property. What was discovered that day was a piece of cloth, clothing, a hostess wrapper, a scrap of metal, and 2 wires that looked like handcuffs. They wore gloves and were extremely careful, but this could have been evidence. When they submitted it, There was a backup, and the prosecutor at the time said nothing they had found that day could be linked with this case.
It was probably a 6 to 10 foot tree stump, about 1,000 pounds, but it had been tipped over and then uprighted, so the root system was about 18 inches above the ground. And we thought that was very odd. We took a log chain and I took my truck and we hauled it out of there, and then we hand dug underneath it. We did call the sheriff's department to come. They came. They did not take it then.
So Kelly took the box of evidence back. There it sat at her house until she went to retrieve it after a separation from her now ex-husband, who was Richard Green's brother. When she retrieved the box and headed to her home, everything was there, except the handcuffs.
Was someone trying to cover up what really happened to Richie and hide evidence that pointed to Richard Green's involvement? Kelly believes this is possible.
There was another odd instance that occurred near the previously mentioned 200 acres. Remember that this is the property that Richard Green was often near and had access to. A theory was brought to searchers that led them to want a search of the neighbor's property. After getting the neighbor's permission, they had their eye on a scorched spot that was discovered.
That immediate property, we have searched as much as we can and done what we feel. But I will say this, that the homeowner and her son believe wholeheartedly that he is still there somewhere and we have missed him. He said he could be anywhere on that 200 acres. Now,
I was about to say that's a lot of land. Yeah.
So there is, to the west of that property, we've done some searches. Dog searches, ground penetrating radar searches. We did find an area, there's a place that's like 3 places down, and it was rumored that Al Capone used to go there. And when we got to the back of it, we found an interesting area. We took samples, we sent them off to the dog team I used to use. They've retired now, but we sent it off to them. They did some training with it. The dogs hit on the samples, so we brought them here. We found out that area that we took the samples was actually not these people's property, but the people behind it. So the people behind it that own that property, there's a cabin on it that has no power, no water, no anything. And what it is, these people are farmers. They don't live there, but they own this piece of property to vacation, like on weekends. So we got their permission to go there and do another search, and the dogs did hit on that area again. And my radar also found some interesting things. Okay. So when we were looking, we then talked to the property owner and said, hey, what we'd like to do is this area right here, it was like, I'm going to say it's like 10 foot by 15 foot. Mm-hmm. What we want to do is dig up top layer, 12 inches of it, take it off, and then sift from there on down. Mm-hmm. And actually the Western Michigan University School of Medicine, their anthropology department wanted to come and help us sift through that because it was an area, it was interesting. Well, ironically, the homeowner said, well, yes, I have a piece of equipment that we're going to bring in to do that, and we'll do it on such and such date. Well, then the time came, and the piece of equipment that he was going to borrow was part of a divorce or something, so he couldn't get it. I had asked my cousin Steve, Richie's little brother, would he be willing to come with his equipment with the company he worked for at the time, because they had offered to loan it. And so he said yes. So I tell the homeowner or the property owner, okay, my cousin has this piece of equipment, he'll come in, and the guy says, well, you're only bringing that equipment in here if I can run it. Well, the owner of the equipment is like, no, my guy who wants to use it is going to, Steve is the operator of this equipment, so the guy refused to let me do it. Property is like, if you think about that type of, if you were in that situation where you killed somebody and you want to hide the body, is entirely possible. In that scenario, if that were true, that they took him back there to burn him.
We wanted to mention this just to show you that there is so much mystery surrounding this case, and there's often resistance when a search is needing to be conducted. Are people hiding something? We just don't know.
There was also a search of Bob Clark's family-owned property. Bob's parents lived on the property, and all 3 of them were supposedly upset and resisting the property being searched, but they did give in. As the search was being conducted, ground-penetrating radar showed that there was a mass underneath concrete that looked newer than the rest. When searchers asked about the concrete, the family said that there was a part of a cherry tree underneath. Police decided not to dig this concrete up, As we said previously, the family was upset. They stated the family had cooperated enough and the search was over. Was it really a piece of cherry tree, or could it have been something more? And this is where the ties with Bob Clark end, so we will not be mentioning him further. We want to focus on the main person of interest for just a few more minutes, Richard Green.
Though the property owned by Richard Green's ex-wife did not hold Richie's remains, there was a possibility of someone else knowing where it was.
A man named Jack Mannon, who often worked for Richard Green's brother Bill claims he saw Richard Green putting the boots to Richie Hitchcock the night of his disappearance. Jack would later end up committing suicide, as well as a man he lived with in Montana named Rick Thorpe.
Rick Thorpe left a suicide note to the detective assigned to Richie's case, which just seems like an odd coincidence.
We know all these names can get incredibly confusing. Essentially, these two men who claimed to know that Richard Green killed Richie and hid his body both committed suicide within a few years of each other. Both claims were thought to have known where Richie's body was.
Of course, this was incredibly promising, and Kelly was hopeful that this would be it.
He'd written him a letter saying, Jack Mannon told me that he buried Richie Hitchcock at this property. Our searchers out there, we sent our dogs out there, and we did go on a penetrating radar, and we did end up doing an excavation out there that proved he was lying. They did not bury him out there.
Right.
At least not where he told them.
But could it be that the map was just drawn incorrectly, and these men did know where Richie's body was? We will never know.
This case has many people of interest. Why? Because the stories and theories never end.
A lot of people think that we are looking to blame someone. We're looking for justice. Justice means jack shit to us right now if we don't have Richie's remains. We want to be able to bury him. It's not your right to do that, people. That's not your privilege in life.
Kelly has expressed how many times individuals have reached out to her saying that they have information about the case, but they never follow through. A person of interest named Brian Bender, who was a friend of Richard Green and was possibly at the bar that night, has been implicated a few times from different witnesses. One of these stories includes Brian's old girlfriend and a phone of hers containing information of Richie's murder. He seemed promising, but none of these stories panned out. Brian did agree to speak to authorities, but he failed to inform them of what he said he knew, which was the information the family had been pleading to get, the location of Richie's remains.
Lose a little bit of hope when somebody of interest is no longer here, you know?
Kelly did give some promising news in our last phone call. We cannot go into detail due to this being very recent and promising, but there is another area being searched that has ties to Richard Green. We will be talking more in depth in part 2 regarding the eyewitness situation that brought on this search.
These will be the only theories we are bringing to you in depth during this episode, but the theories don't stop there. Rumors have gone everywhere, from Richie being pushed down the stairs, multiple police cover-up stories, Richie being put into a wood chipper, the list goes on. And this poor family had to hear all of it. And with each crazy story and different location, at the end of the day, there is still no sign of what occurred or of Richie's body.
And that's what this family really wants. They want to be reunited with their loved one.
We will have part 2 of this case out on all podcasting platforms shortly.
In this second part, we will have Officer Matt Like go in depth with us over some of these theories about the suspects mentioned, the searches they've done, and the suicide notes and evidence left behind.
We hope you tune in as we learn more about this case.
This is our first local active missing person case we have covered in this in-depth format, and it is something we hope to continue in the future.
If you are interested in learning more and learning with us on how we can help these families bring their loved ones home, please follow our social media links in the show notes.
Thank you, and we will be back with part 2 soon.
We have to. Richie deserves to be looked for, and he deserves to be found.